SleepTech Talk is brought to you by Fisher & Paykel. Fisher & Paykel Healthcare is a leader in CPAP mask design and innovation for over 20 years. Their unique technologies have benefited millions of OSA patients through their top CPAP masks. These advancements continue to further enhance patient experience and outcomes.
Soulish is redefining how sleep apnea risk is identified. Using a simple selfie-style face scan, our AI delivers a sleep risk score in under a minute. The Soulish platform then connects providers to evaluation, testing, and therapy through one seamless pathway, because every patient deserves expert guidance wherever they are. Choose Soulish. One selfie, better sleep. Scan the QR code to know more.
SleepTech Talk is sponsored by React Health. Within our LunaPAP device line, each offering is FDA approved, encompassing CPAP, APAP, bilevel, and bilevel ST models. Our thoughtfully selected array of PAP interfaces and accessories complement our LunaPAP device line while accommodating diverse patient requirements.
All right, it's time for another show, and you know what that means. It's time for pre-cals. And Emerson, what's going on today?
You know, Jerry, we have Dr. Janet Kennedy coming on the show today. She is a psychologist, NYC Sleep Doctor.
Okay.
And she's a clinical psychologist, has done a lot of work with CBTI. And so really looking forward to what she has to share with us today. We've had a few psychologists on. It's going to be fun to see someone that's got her varied experience and what she has to offer today.
And CBTI, we hear it tossed around a lot. We don't hear it being used enough. So this is going to be fun. In fact, I'm sure almost everybody has had that one time or the other where they've laid awake at night thinking about all sorts of things and they can't turn their head off.
Yep,
Can't come off their mind. I wonder if she's going to be able to talk to us about that.
I hope so. Maybe, I know she's done a little bit of work with dreams and nightmares with, I think we'll maybe could ask her a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy for nightmares. So hopefully that can give us a chance to talk about that too today. So
that'll be good. And get us a chance to talk about, where is Robert today?
You know, he is AWOL. I don't know what's going on, but we miss him. He is definitely makes our show better, and we'll miss him today. He's going to miss out on a great conversation, I think.
I think so too. And it would have been good to have him with his throwing a wrench in the question. So
right. His dizzying intellect is exciting.
Exactly. All right, you ready to get started?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, on to the show.
Lights out.
Welcome, everyone, once again to another episode of SleepTech Talk, the sleep podcast with your hosts and friends, Emerson Kerr, Robert Miller, and me, Dr. Gerald George Moneycarode. Folks, thank you all so much for joining us once again. It's been an amazing journey, and all thanks to you. Thank you so much for the likes, the shares, all the love, and we ask you to continue showing up and continue the support. We can't thank you enough, and it's because of you that we keep doing this each and every time. And a huge shout out to our sponsors. Please be sure to check them out. Without them, we can't keep doing what we're doing, and they make this possible. So be sure to check them out and give them a shout out as well. With that being said, Robert's not here today, right? And so
that's right. Yeah.
What is going on today?
Well, Jerry, thanks so much. We are so fortunate today. We have Dr. Janet Kennedy. She has a PhD in psychology. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and sleep specialist known as the New York City Sleep Doctor. She is the founder of NYC Sleep Doctor. That is at nycsleepdoctor.com. It's a practice focused on treating behavioral sleep disorders through psychotherapy, coaching, and consulting. She specializes in helping adults, adolescents, and sometimes children overcome issues like insomnia, night walking, nightmares, and non-restorative sleep using evidence-based methods, particularly cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI. With over 20 years of experience, she began her work at the Manhattan VA Hospital, where she developed and launched a multi-site sleep disorders treatment program for veterans to improve sleep without medication. She had a private practice in 2008. Dr. Kennedy offers online telehealth sessions in states where licensed. She is also the author of The Good Sleeper, The Essential Guide to Sleep for Your Baby and You, a sought after speaker, and has appeared in media, podcasts, and publications on sleep topics. Her practice emphasizes non-medication approaches to achieve restful sleep and break cycles of poor sleep and exhaustion. So sorry for tripping over my tongue there a little bit, Dr. Kennedy. Welcome to the show. It is so exciting to have you on. One of the questions that we just love to ask, because we all have our own story of why sleep.
Mhm.
What got you into sleep medicine?
Well, my first job was at the VA. I had done my internship there, and they brought me back to be the psychologist in primary care. And at the time, Ambien was expensive, and it was being doled out quite a lot in the veteran population. And they were looking for alternatives, and they wanted me to create this program as that alternative. So I quickly became an expert in sleep and trained myself in CBTI, built out a program, trained interns, collected data, launched it, ran it at the Brooklyn, Manhattan, and St. Albans VA sites, which are all actually under one, that's one VA multi-site center. And I did that for quite a while and then started to have kids and got interested in children's sleep, basically because I wanted to be able to sleep myself and go to work the next day because I knew that I wasn't going to be much good to anybody if I was up all night for months and months on end. And so in 2008, I decided that I wanted to give private practice a try, and I launched NYC Sleep Doctor, part doing about half working with parents of young children and then half working with adults. And over the years, I've leaned more into adults. And as I've gotten out of the child rearing and more into the midlife woman age myself, I've gotten more interested in midlife women going through perimenopause and menopause and the sleep issues that go along with that. But I treat anybody and everybody. So I see a lot of men coming to me wanting to sort of maximize their health, get out of bad sleep ruts, get off medications. I see a lot of young adults coming in sort of at post adolescence, realizing that sleep isn't as easy as it used to be, and needing to kind of clean things up and get on track. And I love it. I love it because it's short term. I meet a lot of different people, and helping people with their sleep is really incredibly rewarding.
So, with that in mind, we talk a lot on the show about women and sleep, kind of experiencing it yourself and some of the dynamics. What have been some of those learnings, not only for you, but through your patients? Because, what we see a lot is that women have been treated like little men, for such a long time. And, we're beginning to see that narrative change. The academy's really giving more focus to this. How has that affected your practice, kind of looking at it through your personal lens and as a psychologist?
Well, my first real foray into hormonal sleep issues was in pregnancy, actually. And because I was already doing this work, it wasn't scary to me. I understood what was happening, so I was frustrated, but I didn't get into the kind of loop that often then perpetuates the problem and makes it into something more permanent. So I count myself lucky with that. But understanding that physical link way back then, which was now a very long time ago, help sort of set the stage for me. And then certainly going through hormonal changes later on. And at that time, sleep wasn't necessarily my main issue, but I was definitely plugged into a lot of different women's groups, sharing information online about all the different things that are happening to our bodies, and trying to understand and share information and get good care. Um, so that really inspired me to really educate myself much more in terms of the physiology and also coordinated care that's needed, so that a lot of what I do with the women I work with is help them access appropriate medical care. And fortunately, that's now much more available. I mean, we have a long way to go, but there are affordable specialty practices now that are really excellent, providing much greater access and immediate access to care when women are really in crisis, because oftentimes that those changes come up kind of all, it's sort of like the frog in the a boiling pot of water. Like when you realize it's happening, then it's suddenly like this huge emergency, and you need to you can't wait 3 months to see your doctor and then another 6 weeks to get a call back. It just, that model doesn't work for perimenopause for sure.
Well, it kind of reminds me, some of what I've, read online about you is kind of getting into the sleep anxiety piece. Kind of as
Absolutely.
you're talking about that, it sort of reminded me of that statement. Can you kind of elaborate on what that means and how you help someone manage sleep anxiety?
Sure. And this is the sleep anxiety. It does not discriminate age or gender wise, for sure. Basically, sleep issues, as you know, come about for any number of reasons, explainable or not. But what keeps the sleep problem in place is the way that we react to it. And that can be behavioral, it can be trying to make up for lost sleep and sort of distorting the natural homeostatic process of rebounding from a rough night. Or it can be the anxiety that builds around whether you're going to rebound at all. Like you have a bad night and you start saying to yourself, well, I better get back on track tonight because I have this big thing tomorrow. Or what if this persists? What if this the rest of my life? What if, suddenly everything's broken and I'm never going to enjoy anything again. I mean, these are the thoughts that occur, and they're not crazy. It's a desperate feeling when you're exhausted, and then that's compounded by, all of the clickbait out there every time there's a new study saying, if you don't get 7.2 hours of sleep, you're going to die early, get fat, or have dementia. Like that's not helping people when they're struggling. And so what I do with is, we typically with CBTI, you start with the behavioral part. And partly that's because it works really well. And when you can get in there and make a few strategic behavioral changes, oftentimes people get traction really quickly, and start to see that their body can do it. Their body can actually sleep. And once that aha moment happens, the anxiety starts to diminish, or get into at least a more manageable level or form. And then, then we work with the anxiety too, right? And, some of it is correcting misconceptions and changing catastrophic language. That's the CBT part, where you identify the thoughts like, oh, I'm going to be a disaster tomorrow. I'm not going to be able to function. And I often say to people, like, well, have you ever not functioned? Like, what does that even mean? You will perhaps have a less than optimal or even bad day, but is that, in the sort of scatter plot of data points in your life, those things do happen and you make it through, and then you have another night and another day. So kind of putting those things back into perspective, not trying to say no big deal, right? I'm not trying to say it feels good when you don't sleep, or that it's not a problem, or even that you perform optimally when you're sleep deprived. That's not the point. The point is that these things do happen. We can tolerate it. And when you tell yourself you can't tolerate it, you are building the anxiety, and that gets more and more disruptive. The body gets into a state of hyperarousal. You go into your fight or flight response. Suddenly, you've got adrenaline making things worse instead of better, and you're off to the races. So, if you shift that and start to focus on your resilience of, no, I'm not necessarily going to love the way I feel tomorrow, but my body has ways to help me through that bad day. You get adrenaline during the day when you're sleep deprived. It gets you through that presentation. It gets you, through the day. And then you have the opportunity to unwind and process it and move on into a better night. But you have to be able to kind of get out of that loop. And that's where I try to help people get that traction.
A sound sleep calls for a high-performing mask. Introducing F&P Nova Nasal with swing fit headgear. From fitting and seal to minimal noise and draft, it's performance defined. Go to fphcare.com/Nova Nasal to learn more.
Soulish is redefining how sleep apnea risk is identified. Using a simple selfie-style face scan, our AI delivers a sleep risk score in under a minute. The Soulish platform then connects providers to evaluation, testing, and therapy through one seamless pathway, because every patient deserves expert guidance wherever they are. Choose Soulish. One selfie, better sleep. Scan the QR code to know more.
Now, you've got a couple of strategies that you talk about when it comes to working in the bedroom, and then certain things to read and not read in the bedroom.
Yeah.
What are some of those, and can you kind of walk us through that?
So, with now that so many people work at home, and certainly during the real like lockdown period and COVID, it was a really big issue. People were working in bed. They weren't getting dressed even. They were just like in, maybe you'd put on a decent shirt, but you're in your pajama pants and just kind of like day is blending into night. There's no distinction, and that can be trouble, because if the bed is a place where you're solving life's problems and you're getting your work done and you're fighting with your partner and you're shopping or doom scrolling, then the bed loses its value as a cue for sleep. And I totally identify with people getting comfort out of being in bed, and during a crazy crisis time like we were in 6 years ago, wanting to pull the covers up is a natural thing. So obviously having some empathy there and compassion for those impulses is important, but really helping people understand that that's not a long-term viable habit, and creating a space for the business of life that's not the place where you're supposed to be turning it all off is really important. And, I live in New York City. People don't have spare rooms to do that stuff in. Sometimes people are living in one room. And so you have to get creative with how you define your spaces. And if there's nowhere else to sit but the bed, I would have people sit on the bed, just not in the bed or at the other end of it, or, find some way to change it up to make it feel different when it's time for bed. And oftentimes that's good enough. Um, but then when it comes to the sort of bedtime routine and the distractions that I find are really helpful, I do differ a little from the purists in the CBTI purists, because they will say, don't read in bed and read boring things. But I have found in doing this for over 20 years and putting myself to bed too, that that walk from the couch to the bed is often a source of anxiety, right? You get yourself nice and sleepy reading something, and then you try to sleepwalk to bed and not wake yourself up, and already your mind is going to that place of, oh, I hope I don't wake myself up too much. What if I'm not sleepy when I get back to bed? And then already you're moving in the other direction. And I find that if people can comfortably read in bed without a lot of anxiety or sort of self-talk around, clock watching or hoping that they're falling asleep or not disturbing their partner, and they can remain calm and make that a lovely time, that's really helpful because you can read past the point of, just sleepiness. You can read until you're not processing the words on the page, put the book down and go to sleep. And with practice, oftentimes people get frustrated that they can't stay awake long enough to read enough because it's such a good sleep cue. And then my other sort of diversion is I prefer to read things that are interesting, and engaging, not, necessarily axe murder or mysteries or whatever, things that are going to get you freaked out and overly agitated. But if I'm trying to read, a textbook at night, I'm not getting out of my mind. I'm out of my like racing thoughts. I'm still making my grocery list. I'm still thinking about all the things I didn't do during the day that I need to do tomorrow. And the whole point of reading is to pause that stuff, to really separate your daytime, multitasking brain from sleep and give the brain a chance to slow down, calm down. And the body takes that cue and says, okay, if she's over here, reading about, Fantasyland and wherever, there's no fires to put out. I can assert my sleep imperative now, and the body will take over and take you to sleep. And with practice, it works quite well. And I've found, people report better sleep quality as well, when they take that time to read before bed. And, it doesn't have to be long. So those are my tricks.
I
Some of
think
them.
it's, I think those are some really good tricks. And talking about tricks, if somebody's suffering from nightmares,
Mm.
and we had a guest a while back that did therapy for patients that did have night terrors,
Hmm.
other than nightmares. But could you talk a little bit about the tricks to rewrite these nightmares people have, and
Yeah.
even recurrent kind of right nightmares?
Yeah, so I recently did a formal training in CBTN for nightmares and have had the opportunity to work with a few patients doing this, and it's really remarkable. Um, it's a it's somewhat of an exposure. So you start by telling the nightmare, and often that's really hard for people because nightmares often come from trauma, and then they cause their own trauma, which it's unpleasant to call these things to mind, and so the mind really tries to put them out of awareness and is resistant to approaching these things. So just the act of telling the nightmare is sort of step one, and then you identify different themes, themes of safety, being believed. There's different themes that come up in nightmares that are pretty common. And then, and these are in subsequent sessions, right? It's not like one and done. And then you work on rewriting the nightmare. So actually consciously inserting different content into this nightmare and then rehearsing it. So you read through it multiple times. You get in the habit of reading through it daily, sometimes before bed, sometimes during the day when you're calmer, incorporating relaxation exercises to bring down the physical tension that accompanies exposure to difficult content. And over time, what happens is you don't necessarily dream the new dream, but the old dream starts to change, and that there's more agency, there's more opportunity for escape. Things are sillier or more manageable, um, and or it just stops happening so much because the other piece of it is the avoidance. When you approach something you've been avoiding, oftentimes it stops popping in when it's unwanted because you're not bracing for it. You're not trying to keep it out of awareness. So it's a really remarkable strategy, and I'm so happy to have that in my toolkit because it's really it's so troubling when someone is suffering from recurrent nightmares, and that very often is PTSD related, and so there's a whole other aspect of therapy around PTSD that is separate from this. But so it's not like you're going to cure your PTSD necessarily by doing nightmare therapy. But on the other hand, it does really make a huge difference because once a person isn't afraid to sleep, because they aren't just, waiting for this horror show to happen when they close their eyes, um, then other symptoms are more workable as well.
Talking about other symptoms, what about, we're talking about nightmares and dreams, but the stresses or nightmares in the daytime, you know,
Mm.
job job loss or job stress or death in a family, and that of course, excuse me, that of course transfers or transmits into the person's sleep. How do you work with patients or clients with those kind of situations?
Well, it depends on whether it's an acute stress that's going to pass or it's something that is more long term and requires adjustment. So, it is absolutely normal for your sleep to react to the things that are happening in your life. You can't expect to suffer a deep emotional loss and sleep through the night. I mean, some people do, but most people don't. And it's no there's nothing wrong with a person who can sleep after something like that happens. More power to them. They're probably suffering in a different way. But it is absolutely normal to have those disruptions. I remember after 9/11, I was an intern at the VA on 9/11, and I didn't know that much about sleep at that point, but my sleep was, just messed up for, a month or two. And I was in the city. I wasn't a first responder. I wasn't immediately present. Fortunately, I didn't lose anyone, but I was messed up, and that was normal. Um, and then it reverted to something more normal as I sort of got used to that horrible thing that happened, as it passed a little bit for me. Had I been more directly involved, it would have probably been more disruptive, also normal. So some of it is helping people not feel like a freak for reacting to something in a normal way, and really having compassion for what they're going through and then trying to problem solve. So to say, all right, you're already in a state of hyperarousal because of this stress. What are the other things you're doing that are contributing to that? Maybe you shouldn't be video gaming at night. Maybe you should really be doing more to help yourself unwind. Maybe you need to be in therapy for, to talk through this. But if someone has like a chronic stress, like just a job that is, it has bad boundaries and high pressure, then you want to figure out real routines that can help them manage that. Sometimes that is, sorry, get another job. Rarely, but there are jobs that are just bad fits for people, and people are in toxic situations, and helping them exit them is one solution. But other things are, really understanding how to implement some boundaries, whatever they may be. Maybe it is just 10 minutes of reading that, someone needs to do at night to give themselves that cognitive break from the, super highway of activity and mental activity of the day. Maybe it's more exercise. Maybe it's thinking about how they're compensating with food, or, they're drinking too much, or, trying to understand how they can cope, introduce healthy coping with stress, and rely less on the things that are going to create bigger issues, not really help the situation.
Wow, that's fantastic. I sort of got lulled into following you there. I'm going me, also me. Um, so just real quick, some fun, quick questions before we wrap up.
Sure.
Just three. So the morning shower myth, does a hot shower at night actually help you sleep, or is that a myth?
It actually does help. And it helps. It's not the only way to get that effect, but it helps by raising your body temperature quickly. And then you have the body temperature drops, and that drop is what is helpful for sleep. There's also like a hydrotherapy aspect of the shower, which helps to de-stress you. So that's a nice, healthy thing to do. A bath is good as well. If you don't have time for any of that, you can put a hot water bottle at your feet when you go to bed or wear socks.
Okay.
Wow, good
So
answer.
if the drop is what it is, so a hot shower and then a cold plunge, I'll go to sleep. I was
You
joking.
know,
I was
I
joking.
don't I don't think the cold plunge is
Yeah,
appropriate at
probably
that moment.
not.
Yeah,
All
because you
right.
want your body to like it's cooling from the inside out, right? A cold plunge is on the outside in. So,
All right, next question. The night owl identity. Is being a
mm.
night owl a fixed biological trait, or can a conditioned night owl truly become a morning person?
Somewhere in the middle, right?
Yeah.
Like we all have a chronotype, and
Yeah.
so we favor one over the other. But you can certainly train yourself to sleep well, on a different schedule. The trick is consistency. So the trouble that night owls often get into is that they are night owls on the weekend, and then they try to be early birds during the week. And that doesn't work because you're spending the whole first part of the week trying to get back on track and you feel like garbage in the morning. And then, it's basically, it's what we call social jet lag. So you want to um, commit to not necessarily early bird waking on the weekend, but earlier than you'd like. And keeping that consistency as long as you're able to get enough sleep during the week. Like if you're chronically sleep deprived, that's a whole different story. But um, if you keep a consistent schedule, not varying wildly on the weekends, it's going to be easier for you as a night owl.
Okay, last question. So we're talking sleep tech.
Mhm.
We're the sleep
That's the
nerds. We
name of
have
the
all this
podcast.
stuff.
Yeah,
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 right.
I know that we haven't been very technical, have we?
Yeah, not so much. We have our rings and all the stuff.
Yeah.
So, we have the gadgets. So, is it all worth the money, or is it really just a distraction when it comes to wearables?
So I don't prescribe wearables, and I often ask people to take them off because I find that people tend to get very distressed about what their data is and then that contributes more to performance anxiety. It leads people to look for quick fixes rather than bigger sort of routine changes or healthy behaviors. Like there's something about the tech that leads people into this hacking idea that you can get the payoff without the investment. And, ultimately, drinking some special tonic at night to get 3 more minutes of REM sleep is not going to benefit you. So I, you know, I am biased in that the people I see are anxious about it, and I don't find it helpful for them. But I do think there's a place for the wearables in giving people information that they might not be aware of about their habits. So someone doesn't realize they really aren't allotting enough time for sleep. And that's important. That can lead to profound change. But those granular bits about this amount of, stage two versus that amount of stage three or REM, I find those to be a little much, and they tend to get people pretty agitated about, and also they don't necessarily come with a key where people are understand that no, you actually do spend 50% of the night in stage two sleep. Like that's not a bad thing. So um, I find that it's a source of anxiety for a lot of people.
Well, Doc, thank you so much. That was very, very interesting and also fun. And I
Thank
guess
you.
Emerson and I we kind of geeked out on this. It was really cool to hear all these things, but we are out of time. We
Okay.
so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
It's been absolutely fantastic. And folks out there, thank you so much for joining us once again. And we appreciate all the support, the love, the likes, the shares, the subscriptions. We ask you to keep getting the word out. And we look forward to bringing more amazing guests and amazing content for you in the future. Don't forget, huge shout out to our sponsors. Be sure to check them out. And until next time, we say lights on.
Be sure to check out our clinical sponsor, Sleep Review Magazine. More details in show
All
notes.
right, another show in the books, and that means it's time for postcals. So, Emerson, what were your thoughts?
Jerry, this is one of those few times that I've gotten lulled into our guest and kind of forgot that I was supposed to be interviewing her. That's how much I enjoyed today. As Dr. Kennedy was fantastic, and just how she's looking at different things. I mean, we've had so many guests on that are fantastic, psychologists and behaviorists, but I felt like she brought kind of a different point of view today and how she looked at anxiety and CBTI and nightmares and even some of her sleep hygiene was a little bit abstract, a little different from what we've seen in the past. But I loved her rationale, even
Right,
about what to read, because I totally identify with that. When I am in my head about something and can't seem to stop ruminating, reading something distracting doesn't stop the ruminating. I'm
right.
still deep in my thoughts, and it just, what a brilliant idea that when you're locked into your thoughts like that and can't sleep, get something interesting to break that mental cycle. That's brilliant. I've never thought about that before, and I'm definitely going to be using that next time I'm awake, either having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. So, fantastic advice today.
I agree with you there, especially on that point. I was thinking, if the typical conventional wisdom reads something boring, and I don't want to pull out the end user agreement in order to licensing agreement in order to fall asleep because you can't even begin reading that. But reading something interesting, you're willing to pick up the book and take a look at that. And I agree with you. Overall, the different topics that she spoke about that made it a lot of fun. Kind of got stuck into wanting to keep going. Almost lost track of
Oh,
time there.
no, exactly. I think there's so much more. The one thing I do regret is she's got a book called The Good Sleeper, and maybe we can have her on sometime. But for our listeners, that is definitely a book worth picking up and taking a deeper dive into our guest today if you want to do that. But yeah, what a great visit. Someone we should certainly have back sometime.
Agreed. Well, I think we should call it, especially because Robert's not here today, so it's a
Yeah,
little.
definitely miss that guy. So no, this was good, and certainly glad that we got to meet Dr. Kennedy and look forward to much more with her.
Amen. Well, folks out there, thank you, and until next time, cheers.